Hello, I'm Kathy Foley. I'm just here to introduce the Zoom. The participants will move one to another. But before we started, I wanted to thank all of you who are members of UNIMA-USA. Invite anyone who has not yet become a member to become one. I think we even have a February Valentine's Day special price that is coming up that you might tap into. And if you just go to the website, you're here because you're interested in puppetry. Join the crowd in UNIMA USA, and it's a way to tap into puppetry across the planet. UNIMA International is where we all come together, and by joining your national thing, it will make you aware of some of the opportunities internationally as people come here or you go to other countries. Uh, that said, I really want to thank our three presenters today who will talk about, they're all makers, as many of you out there are. They'll talk to you a little bit about some of their projects. We will have some time for questions at the end, but if not, they all say they're willing if you send them an email, which you can find by looking in the puppetry in UNIMA USA uh, website, or if you're a member, you can see their email, or you can recognize today where they're from and look them up. So our first presenter, many of you will already know, is from the Northwest Puppetry Center in Seattle. Dimitri Carter is a second-generation puppeteer with Carter Family of Marionettes. He currently serves as the director of the Northwest Puppetry Center, or Puppet Center in Seattle. He's performed around the world, including shows at Saint-Louis Palace Theater in Potsdam, Uzbek National Theater in Tashkent, New Victory Theater in New York, lots of other places too. For over a decade, he's focused on teaching puppet carving, master classes, and curating exhibits, drawing from the vast collections at the Northwest Puppetry Center. Bradford Clark will be the second presenter. He's a professor of theater at Bowling Green State University in Ohio. He's traveled and researched puppetry in India, Vietnam, Indonesia, China, Taiwan, Russia, Japan. I saw him recently at a workshop that we were doing in Korea. He's been about everywhere and knows about everything. He studied in Japan with Imada Ningyo and the carver Makimoto Toshisuke. For Atlanta's Center for Puppetry Arts, he served as a curator for the Worlds of Puppetry Museum. He directed a Balinese-inspired Tempest that was early in his career and has done original puppet productions, including Monkey Storm's Heaven, Frankenstein, and Magnificent Baron Munchausen. He's published in Asian Theater Journal, Puppetry International, Theater Design and Technology, Puppetry Yearbook, Puppetry Journal, and Sutradhar, which is the Indian puppetry magazine. Sky Strauss will be the third presenter. Sky is an assistant professor at Jacksonville State University in Alabama. She completed her PhD at Northwestern University with a dissertation which won the UNIMA USA Staub Award for excellence in writing on puppetry. Her research spans design, scenography, and puppetry to highlight how materiality affects performance creation, how objects tell stories. Her writing has been featured in TD and that's Theater Design and Technology, I think, Puppetry International, and PAJ, Performing Arts Journal. She edits book reviews for Puppetry International Research, and she reviews for the Chicago International Puppet Theater Festival. When not lecturing and she's making magical things, i.e. puppets. So those are our presenters. If you have any questions, you can put them in the Q&A. At the very end, we will come back, have all our people on screen, and take some of the questions there. So make sure you put them into the Q&A. So thank you so much for being here, and I hand it over to Dimitri Carter.
Hello, everyone. So I hope you can see me here. I just tried to turn on my screen and turn on my microphone here. I've also opened up my little chat screen. So hello to everybody who's joined us so far from around the US. I see a bunch of people. Oh, and from Canada and Korea too, South Korea, New York, Amsterdam. Oh, we've got a lot of people from Puerto Rico. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Let's see here. Oh, okay, I'm trying to get my screen looking right now. Okay, thank you all. So I'm joining you all today from a little park nearby where I'm staying right now in Lugang in Taiwan. And I thought I'd talk a little bit about some of the tools and materials that I've learned about while here. Um, so um, for myself, as Kathy mentioned, thank you so much for the introduction. Um, I, I'm a second generation puppeteer. My dad liked to carve wood, and so I grew up carving and traveling around the world doing shows and studying. I've been able to pick up some tricks and some different techniques here and there. And so I'd like to introduce some of the Taiwanese tools that I've been looking into recently. Um, so I prefer the traditional tools and the traditional materials. So I tend to stay away from like the flex shaft power tools and things like that. Although those can be a major time saver, and a lot of traditional artists are indeed using the modern tools as well. Um, but I'm going to stick to the more typical hand tools when I'm talking today. Um, Now, one of the most basic tools that we use a lot of time, and it's interesting whenever I travel around, I meet carvers, and this is one of the primary tools that a lot of people use is a skew. And first of all, I'll talk about the a straight one. Here's a straight blade, and you can see here this one here has a single bevel, so it has a bevel on this side, but no bevel on this side. So it goes sharp on one side and it goes flat on the other, and so this allows you to give some precision cutting without splitting the wood in two direction. It's splitting it in one direction here. But because it's a straight blade here, it's best for cutting like grooves and cutting along planes where you're not carving the corners in. Because when you're carving the corners in, you create these grooves in the wood that you might not necessarily want. And you also tend to dull in the blade where it's hitting more material than the rest of your chisel. So that's a straight blade. It's just going straight across like that. Um, but what I was mentioning with the skew is it's actually going at a little bit of an angle. And this will be, kind of redundant information for a lot of people who already carve. And sorry as I swat away mosquitoes every time. But this one here is a skew, which actually has a double bevel. And as a lefty, double bevel skew is actually one of my favorites. Because it allows me to switch and carve in both directions without having to worry about like the single bevel has the change in angle that you have with a skew flips from one side to the other. So with a double bevel, you're able to go back and forth quite easily. Um, and it's really remarkable when I've traveled around and met some great master carvers, how much of the work they do just with a skew. And oftentimes it's with a single bevel skew. And so you can see with holding the material here, I can just with a little bit of pressure with my thumb and with my wrist, I can get flakes of wood to come off quite easily here. I can start working material away. And then grasping the material in different ways and grasping the tool in different ways, you can get quite a lot of work done just with the skew. Now, this one, like I mentioned, is a double bevel, and I like a lot of times having a really tiny one that almost works like as a pencil, and you can just work some fine details around with that. Um, but it's curious. For some reason, a lot of times when I look for a double bevel skew, it's difficult to find, and I can only find a single bevel skew. Um, and right here is a single bevel. And when you're looking at a single bevel skew, they're actually made specifically for working with your right hand or your left hand. So this one is a lefty skew that I was really lucky to find. Often makers don't make left-handed tools. And so this one, it was actually the last one in inventory, and I was able to pick it up. He actually had run out of right-handed skews, and the only one left in the shelf was this one little tiny short left-handed skew, which is a really wonderful little tool that I like a lot. It fits nicely with the end fitting at the palm of my hand. I can have a real comfortable grip on it without having a large tool. Um, Now you might have noticed with the double bevel skew, this is a really long piece of metal here, and for this one reason is you can get more leverage as you go out. You can also continue using this tool for a lifetime or more. As you continue to sharpen the tool, it'll get shorter and shorter over the years. And so by starting with a longer piece of metal, this tool will be able to last a few decades more than than the shorter tool here. And you may notice this one here has a little red marking on the end. And oftentimes there's different ways that tool makers can identify, when they're handmade tools, there's no machine stamping or anything to identify them. So this one here with the red marking is actually a different grade of steel than the others. This one is a high carbon steel. Oh, sorry for some noise passing by. But this is a high carbon steel, which is easier to sharpen and keep a decent sharp edge on than some of the other steel that this particular maker uses. And so I was really happy to find this one. So those are the skews and the straight edge chisel here. Um, Now, for a lot of puppets, we're not working on just flat surfaces or a simple sphere. We're wanting to carve faces and hands and things like that. And so when looking into different areas with grooves and such like that, we do need gouges. And so here's a really tiny fine gouge which has a U shape on the blade. Oh, sorry, I thought I'd found a quiet spot for the discussion, but there's a little bit of morning noise happening now. But with the gouge, you're able to create the little grooves in the wood. Like this one here is so fine that you can actually create sometimes when you're carving the groove lines for hair or for facial hair, or wrinkles or anything like that. You can find a little tiny gouge like that. Most times, however, when you're looking at woodworking tools, it's hard to find really fine sculpting tools. A lot of people doing woodwork are doing other types of woodwork, furniture and house building and everything like that. Um, Interestingly, here where I am in Lugong is actually famous for the wood carving tools. When I traveled around Taiwan, I talked to the puppeteers about where are all the puppet makers, and for the puppeteers, a lot of them here specialize in performing and don't necessarily carve, which is a little bit unusual for puppeteers in the United States, because puppeteers in the United States, oftentimes we wind up doing everything. We perform and we carve and we market our shows and we do it all. But in many places in the world, the puppetry is so specialized. The performers might spend their whole lives performing. The puppet makers might spend their whole lives carving. Sometimes there's even specialists who spend their whole lives painting, doing costumes. Here in Taiwan, there's some specialists who spend their entire careers making nothing but puppet hats. So it's really amazing to see how specialized some people can get in their craft and become masters in a lifetime of embroidering puppet hats, tiny little hand puppet heads. Um, so anyhow, for the carvers, I was asking around, and where are all the carvers at? And a lot of the famous carvers live in this county of Zhanghua. There's a couple of very famous puppet families in the Zhanghua County and Zhanghua City. And this town that I'm in now, Lugang, is a small town in the county of Lugang of Zhanghua, and this is where most of the carvers said they like to get their good carving knives. So I was lucky enough to find two different tool makers that I've enjoyed making. Most of the ones that I've showed you so far are actually by these ones are by Mr. Zhuang, and he makes some very specialized tools as well. Um, this one here is a draw knife. Now, nowadays, a lot of people do the roughing work with power tools, and so a lot of the work of shaving down, a piece of square stock into a dowel shape or something. Uh, People don't do by hand, but traditionally, this would have been done with things like draw knives. Um, and this is actually a draw knife that he's discontinued. They're not so popular anymore. So I was happy to get this one. He's making still one size, but he used to make three sizes of draw knives. And so I was really happy to be able to add this old draw knife to my collection. Um, I also mentioned the skews are often single-sided, and this is a set of single-sided with both a left-handed skew and a right-handed skew. And these are designed as marking tools. Um, One thing that the single bevel skew does a little bit better than the double bevel is precision work. And so when you're marking out your wood, you might want the gouge to follow a very straight line and um, not cut into the opposite side. And so if you're trying to run a line down, you can run it with a left-handed or a right-handed, depending on which side your working material will be kept on. So this is a really interesting matching set of a left-handed and right-handed skew. Um, let's see. Um, Another tool that I thought was quite interesting, and being from Seattle and the Pacific Northwest, I often associate this tool with Northwest carvers, is a crook knife. And crook knives, growing up in Seattle, I thought were really unique to the area. And I've since learned that they do exist in a lot of other cultures. And when I was living in Japan, I was really surprised to find out that crook knives were quite popular in Japan for carving and for actually just doing the work of flattening out a board of wood. Even you can hand hewn board of wood with a crook knife. Um, and crook knives lost popularity in Japan a few hundred years ago when hand planes became popular. Um, and only in recent years, a lot of makers have started making the crook knives again. So this maker was actually the first tool maker I found in Taiwan who's making crook knives. And this is a different one that I mentioned. The other tools were by Mr. Zhuang. This is by Mr. Shu, who runs a shop actually just across the street and a couple blocks from where I'm sitting right now. Um, and this particular crook knife is actually designed as a lefty tool. He marks his tool with lefty and righty, depending on what he makes. And it's really fabulous because a lot of tool makers don't bother making lefty versions of their tools. And so this
Two
one, it has
minutes.
a single bevel. Okay, thank you. And I'm able to pull along with the tool like so. One thing that's really important to remember with a crook knife is if you're carving that direction, don't push with your thumb because there is a sharp blade on that side a lot of times. Uh, so that's a crook knife. Um, and then let's see. Oh, a very important tool is a mallet. And this is a really basic but a beautiful mallet. It's just a single piece of wood, but the design of it actually allows for more weight than if it would just have a little hammer shape at the top. It has a lot of good weight to it. You can get more precision or more force depending on where you're whacking your mallet from. And some tools are more designed for using mallets. You'll see oftentimes the metal stops to stop the handle from splitting are designed for a mallet to give a whack on. And one last tool, or no, a couple of tools that I'll mention. One I'd never seen before is this, which is a little bamboo tube with a bit of fabric stuffed inside. And this, what it's for, is when you've sharpened your knife and want to keep it from getting rusty, you put your oil into the fabric and you can rub your oil onto your blade without getting your fingers so messy. And so this I was really happy to find. I'd never seen these little brushes before that have the bamboo cup to hold the oil. And so that's that. And one last tool, and I'll pass it on to the next presenter. I'd never seen this one before. It's a very important tool for anybody to have in their shop. Um, I'm not sure if anybody can guess what this is, but it's got a little twisty handle here that closes a little sharp blade inside. And what it's for is actually it's for breaking your cake of tea apart to make a pot of tea. So this is a very important tool for you to have in your workshop to make yourself a cup of tea. So I hope everyone's found that interesting and helpful. Thank you so much, everyone, and I'll pass it on to our next presenter. Thank you, everyone. Bye now.
See. Hi, can you see me? Great, great. That was wonderful to hear Dimitri talk about so many things that actually impact and what I'll be talking about, which has to do not so much about my own work, but my studies in Japan quite a while ago, actually, although I've managed to sort of follow up on other workshops since, although I haven't been able to work as directly as I did studying in Tatsui village in Ida. I first went to Japan to, I'd been there before, but I was able to get to Ida many, many years ago as a result of Martin Holman, who some of you are familiar with, and who now has a company in Tokushima City. He brought a group of students to study performance with the Yamada Ningyo troupe in the Ida area. And I kind of tagged along and ended up actually studying construction, carving the kashira, the heads, with Toshisuke Makimoto. So that's primarily what I'll be talking about. I actually was able to take a lot of photographs, although different heads. So we'll look at that. But this is actually a workshop on the left that you can go visit. It's a workshop museum now in Tokushima that belonged to Tengo Hisa I, who's probably the most famous of all Tokushima carvers. One of the things that's really interesting to me about traditional Japanese puppet carving and puppet making is that the basic techniques, even though there's lots of subtleties that have changed, but the basic techniques are identical. This is the Shibai Gakuya Zue, was published between 1800 and 1802, and it actually has to do with different forms of theater. But the designs here are not radically different than
Brad,
what you would expect
are
to
you
see.
sharing a
Oh,
slide?
I'm sorry.
We're not seeing it.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I thought it was. Let me go back. Oh, that's strange. It should be.
Did you share
We
screen?
will try again. How's that?
Yeah, we can see it now.
Excellent. Well, let me go back. I can go back very quickly, and I'll put it in presenter mode. Sorry about that. Again, as I was saying, the actual carving of heads has not changed radically in hundreds of years. This particular image, I always thought this was Tengo Hisa, but I actually, when I went to confirm, I'm not sure it is. Judging by the large size of the heads, I suspect that's Tokushima or Owaji, somewhere in Awa. This is the actual Tengo Hisa's workshop museum in Tokushima, which you can visit now. And as I was saying, if you look back at some of the designs from theater behind the scenes published between 1800 and 1802, you see that the basic approach has not actually changed very radically. What we're doing now is pretty much the same as they were doing then. Now, in the Ida City area in Nagano Prefecture, Kuroda Ningyo is a company that's actually quite famous. It's said that their theater there may very well be the oldest puppet stage in Japan. A lot of theaters were built in the 19th century all over Japan. There's actually quite a few of these in the Ida area, but this is said to be the oldest. And then that's their puppet storage area on the right, although it's changed. It was just there last summer, and it is differently arranged. It's not unusual for these companies to have, 100 heads or more. Now, this is the company I studied with directly, Imada Ningyo. Their theater is new on the left there, and that's the Shinto shrine that they are associated with on the right, and then that's their storeroom. And then here is Makimoto Sensei. Makimoto was actually a businessman. He came to carving rather late. He started with religious carvings, but a friend of his, probably his best friend, was one of the members of Imada Ningyo that decided to revive Imada Ningyo after a long period where it was inactive. And they said, well, we need some puppets. And so Makimoto was largely self-taught at first, and then later was able to do workshops with the National Bunraku Theater in Osaka and specialize things. He studied with a living national treasure, just doing hair, for instance. And because there are actually really few carvers in Japan, they tend to know each other and they exchange information. He let me copy about 50 drawings that were both his designs and designs of friends that shared with him, showing mechanisms and different approaches. That's a sambaso over there on the left. This is another one of his. This was at a performance by Kuroda Ningyo, which was in commemoration with the opening of a new factory in the Kuroda region area. And then these are a couple of the figures that he did that were on display at Kuroda Ningyo. And these are from Imada Ningyo. So the basic approach towards doing these puppets is, and some of this is specific to Makimoto, I know. Talking to another carver, he was sort of fascinated because Makimoto Sensei had some mechanisms that were different than what he would have done. So there's lots of individual nuance. But the basic approach doesn't seem to change much from what I've seen from visiting other workshops. That's a hinoki block, which is a really wonderful traditional carving medium. Dimitri was just talking about the fact that there's hinoki in Taiwan, which I didn't know. It's a very, very dense grain. It's very easy to carve in a lot of ways, doesn't want to chip too easily. The initial carving, once you've sort of worked out the basic diagram of front and side, can be done with a pull straw saw. It can also be done with a hatchet. So what you're seeing there on the right, this may be mine. Because several of us, 4 of us were studying at the same time, I'm not entirely sure whose head is whose. But the one on the right is probably mine. You can see it sort of being hacked out in basic shapes. This is actually a different puppet, but this is sort of the next step where you're doing one half of the carving at a time. And this is another skew knife, which is easily the workhorse of the Japanese knives that I've used, and really, really wonderful to work with. And so you can see it kind of developing from a rough into becoming a little more refined. One of the things that I think is really interesting, if you look here along this line, when you start off with a diagram, you draw this line and you poke holes along that line. And as you carve down, you go back and you reinforce those holes. So, even though you've got the center line that you're carving away, you're always able to connect the dots. I'm not quite sure how universal that technique is, but it worked really well. So these are some demos for a musume, a young woman, daughter. Makimoto had done this for another purpose. So these are 3 forms of it. And you can see how it becomes increasingly refined to the point where you then can cover it with what's called gofun, which is essentially shell gesso. Right? So these are the pieces that we were doing. He got a big kick out of the fact that each of us, because our faces had different widths, even though we were all working from the same diagrams, the same measurements, everything was the same, but our faces all really were very unique to each of us. Mine in the middle, so I was kind of the middle size. And I think that this sort of speaks to the fact that very often, even though puppets are made on models, they're still very, very independent and very specific to the carver, but it's a subtlety. It's not quite the same as doing something radically different that's completely self-expressive. It's subtly self-expressive, and I think that's true of a lot of Japanese arts. So once you kind of get the front really refined, then you can go ahead and round the entire head out, which means that in the end, in order to get the katakuri mechanisms in, you've got to split the head in half. And this is terrifying. Working on a project here, I tried to do it with a chisel in my workshop and it got stuck. So that's that middle image, which is just, as it says, it was an epic fail. It took me a long time to break that head in half. But once you do get it split, you can use a curved gouge and begin to carve into the wood. And this is one of the reasons why the hinoki is so important, because you get to the point where it's so thin. And even I find basswood, which works pretty well, it doesn't lend itself to being quite as thin as I think the hinoki is. I'm not sure how true that is or if it's just my perception. But the idea is once you get that far, you really sand it down over and over again to the point where it's incredibly smooth to the finger. And only then are you ready to actually begin brushing on the gofun. And my biggest problem is that I tend to not be very patient. And so sometimes I start painting it when I'm actually not ready to, and then it just reinforces the problem. So as you can see there, in this case, we're installing the katakuri, which are simply blinking eyes that roll up, roll down, the lids roll with it. Here is the gofun on the right, which comes, you can buy it at the store just the way it is there in the box. And it's a powder. It looks a lot, it basically looks like plaster of Paris. I mean, it's a calcium product. And what's important is that you then heat up Nikawa resin. And even though Nikawa comes in a liquid form, it tends not to stick very well. So Nikawa in stick form, which then can be melted and then mixed in a mortar and pestle with the gofun, is still the preferred way to go. And so you go ahead and you begin laying on that on top of the heads. And you're probably going to do at least 25 layers of this. I'm actually working on one downstairs, and I'm beyond that because it's still not smooth enough. You sand it every 5 or so and then eventually get there. What I found one of the longest, most difficult things to do was actually the weaving of hair. And I only ended up doing a couple inches of this. Okasan, Mrs. Makimoto actually ended up doing it all. But, I did maybe an inch or two, but it was a very slow process. And it has to do with this 2-stringed loom and then taking human hair with a special needle and, special hook and wrapping it around there. Once that's done, you go ahead and sew it onto this copper piece, which is made so that it will inset into the head. So you're actually able to cut into the head, push the copper into it, and it looks like the hair is actually growing out of the head. Some earlier, simpler puppets will actually poke holes and put in plugs. but the more sophisticated ones do it in this way. Once that's done, you have one line that goes in the nape of the neck and another that goes right at the hairline. And then you take a black fiberfill kind of material, not that different than what you'd put in a pillow, and pull the hair around it and dress it until you end up with some really beautiful pieces there. Details get painted. You can take that very same Nikalo resin and mix it with Zoomie ink. There's actually raw pigments that can be mixed with it as well. And so you're able to do all the painting with that. And then there on the right, even though the hair isn't finished, that is what it looks like once it's been painted. And in this case, the eyes do rotate up and down. And if you look in the bottom there, that's the dogoshi, which is the control for it. Even though I really wanted to talk about heads today, these are just a couple other details with the feet. Sketches on the left are mine. The legs, in order to keep weight, the top of the leg is actually a kind of a paper mache approach with resin over it to make it harder. And then the bottom of the leg is actually carved. Okay? And if you look there at the top, because Makimoto Sensei actually did puppets for different companies and schools throughout Nagano, and he was, again, this wasn't really a professional activity for him, but he really, really loved it. So he was very active. And he would keep a record of foot sizes and hand sizes. So he would know that certain companies needed a certain size because they vary pretty radically. And then, again, one of my sketches is over there on the left, Makimoto Sensei's diagram for the right male arm, which is articulated. Oh, I'm sorry, it's actually female. What am I saying? That's over there on the right. And then down at the bottom is one of the specialty hands, which actually has fingers, which will move and play musical instruments like a koto, I think, because that's on the left. That's probably for a shamisen. And then you can see a couple of the pieces getting ready to assemble over there on the right. Now, this is a different head.
Brad.
Okay, I think I can do it. These are Makimoto's heads showing some of the internal mechanisms for moving eyes. In this case, instead of using whale baleen, he's using wire. In this case, this is by Amada Yoichiro in Tokushima, who's probably the best known carver. And this is actual whale baleen. And in this case, the eyes go back and forth, but they also open and close. What's interesting is there is work being done with 3D printed kashira by Terada Takashi, who's been working with Amari Sensei. So the previous head was scanned and turned into this. And then I've been using the pieces of this as reference for my own work. Then I've done a couple projects here using, in a very crude way, some of those technologies. I always run out of time to do the karakuri, so I'm in the process of cracking open this head to which is already hollowed out, to go ahead and add that. And that's it. Thank you so much. I do have in my last minute, I would like to show you an example. So this is a sambaso. I worked on this, but what happened was Mr. Makimoto had started it and didn't like it. So he handed it over to me. So I don't remember exactly how much I did, but it was probably mostly paint. And it is very nicely done because sambaso goes into a ritual dance and actually goes through changes as part of it. And all the heads tilt. That's really important. Unfortunately, I think this one's swollen up a little bit. So that's why that eye doesn't want to go back up. And then my last seconds, because Kathy did ask us to show tools, a couple of the ones, traditional ones that I'm used to using. And then finally, my favorite, which is a big hatchet. And this is how you cut, you have to chop the head back. And I think that'll do me. Thank you so much. Yep. Oh, sorry. I think I'm still there. Do you want to, I think you need to, oh, I need to get rid of the share. No, I'm okay with that. I think you need to close me down, Sarah.
I am so sorry. My computer just shut down while we were doing this. I just found another computer and that was the delay. I apologize.
Okay. All right. I think everyone can see me and hear me now. Hi, I'm Skye Strauss, and I'm going to talk to you today about a very different method of puppet making compared to our first two. So for your first two presenters today, the focus was on carving, so working from more material through layers of less and less material to arrive at your shape. And what I'm talking about today is using cardboard and newspaper, plain old paper mache, to go from something two-dimensional that doesn't exist at all to something three-dimensional that's potentially very large. So I have fewer tools, in part because the thing that I'm building would not fit well on camera, but I will get to show you some images and some diagrams that hopefully will help your imaginations. So one of the things that I was thinking about coming into today is that as a maker, I find it really satisfying to go back and forth between student position and teacher position. So one of the things that I was thinking about today is who I learned my methods from and what the differences are between methods for making puppets in one lineage and methods for making puppets in another. So I started out working in theater as a costume technician. So I knew how to make lots of things out of fabric, and a little bit about how to do different kinds of costume crafts that included some overlap with puppet technique. But I really started learning how to be a puppeteer from Dacia Posner when I took her puppetry class at Northwestern University. So at this point, I'm going to share my first slide with you so you can see what I'm talking about while I reference it in words. So when I first started learning to make puppets, one of the ways I learned to make large scale puppets with these paper mache techniques was through Dacia's methods, which she was learning in part from Sarah Peaty, from working with the Puppeteers Cooperative in Boston and being part of the first night parades. So one of the things that I'm showing you on the screen here is 68 ways to make really big puppets by Sarah Peaty. You will also notice on that book, which is one that I love, and you can look for copies of it or borrow them from your puppet friends. And one of the other things you notice on the book is that it's from Bread and Puppet Press. So also, if you think about Peter Schumann's work, the work of Bread and Puppet, also some of the work from Sandy Spieler and In the Heart of the Beast in Minneapolis, a lot of these sort of equally illustrious puppeteers are using these same simple methods. So it was fun to me to know that I was kind of joining that wider field of practice by learning this. So what you see next to the book here on screen is some puppets that we made at Northwestern. This was for an event called the Flight of the Phoenix. And you can see there's a sort of simple T shape that's happening that makes the body of these puppets. And there's fabric attached to the crossbar here. And that's what's forming the bodies of the birds. And the heads that are attached to the top piece of the crossbar are the parts that are made out of cardboard and paper mache. So the reason that the book is here and is helpful to me and could be helpful to you if you can borrow or buy a copy is that it walks you through how to make a variety of basic shapes. So in the case of the bird, these are most definitely the birds that we were making. The heron is an example of a more specific kind of bird. So you have the crest and the neck added to the basic shape. But what the book is walking you through when you look at that diagram is the solid lines are where to cut and the dotted lines are where to score so that your head will fold easily. Now, I don't have a whole sheet of cardboard on camera with me today, but it often helps me to understand, to have someone show me something dimensionally as well. So this is the same basic shape. This is maybe a little bit more parrot than heron, but it's still certainly a bird. Because this is paper and not cardboard, I can't actually score through it, but I've folded it to help make the shape. And you can still see the segments that are cut, this kind of fringe at the top. And then what happens is you start to fold your cardboard, rather than my paper, into shape. So all of your scoring lines are going to help you bend the front in a way that's nice and smooth. And then you're able to take the back pieces and join them together. So once you've folded your cardboard into shape, I often find I have to sort of roll it over something to get it to behave smoothly. then you can there are specific staplers that are made to assemble cardboard boxes, and they're the tool that you want. Your ordinary stapler isn't going to go through all of the layers once you've made this out of cardboard. But once you have your shape, then you're able to put some staples in the back that will eventually be covered by enough paper mache that, especially if you make sure that the tines are to the inside, it's still quite safe to handle. And this gives you your basic shape for the head of your bird. Now, before you start to paper mache, you could also add on to this things like the crest or additional details for the head. I'm thinking about the cardinals that I see in my backyard that have the sort of punk situation on the top of their head. You can also play with how to attach a mouth, so making the lower half of the beak with the same kind of scoring technique. Once you have all of your pieces, you can then start to add paper mache. If you go to sort of look around both the 68 ways, other things put out by Bread and Puppet, you can make glue that will do paper mache out of just flour and water. You can make a very simple paste. But my preferred method is using wallpaper sizing that you get at Lowe's or Home Depot. The thing to know when you're mixing that is that I never mix much more than like a soup takeout container at a time, so that I don't end up creating a lot of waste with things that dry before I can get them used. I usually do put on gloves, and what I'll then do is mix a little bit of size and warm water. The key is to sort of be stirring it as you pour the water in to avoid as much as you can making it too lumpy. And then you can take your pieces of paper, preferably for me, honestly, newspaper, real newspaper, if you can still get a hold of it, works the best. There was a point where that, like cardboard, was plentiful in the recycling bins of everyone, but we've certainly passed that point, I think. I have also made use of the many copious printouts that we make in an academic library that come out a little wrong as a source of paper. You want to do at least 3 layers of paper mache in order to make it strong, and then you can add another layer either by painting or using colored paper to finish your creature. You can then work on attaching it to the body. You'll notice here in the diagram, there's additional advice for what's best to do with the fabric. 3 puppeteers will need to run constantly to make the bird fly, but you will make their job easier if you use light cloth and give your puppet plenty of fringe. One thing that I find helpful personally is I think lining fabric is great, plain old cheap polyester stuff, because honestly, it floats really, really beautifully and it comes in tons of colors and prints. So that's often a fun place to look. There are also different ways to work with cardboard and some of these basic techniques. So here you see pterodactyls that are variations on the bird that we made in Dacia's class. So these would have been my first puppets made with that cardboard plus paper mache method. But when I was at the Prague Quadrennial, I also participated in a workshop with Gilberto Conti, who asked us to call him Gio, who grew up working with the carnivals in Rio de Janeiro and was then teaching us his method for making cardboard puppets. Notice that some of this is the same. He tells you to look at the real animals to figure out what your shapes are going to be. You're still working with scoring and cutting choices to form the shapes of the head. But because this workshop had to move very quickly, we didn't have time for layers of paper mache to cure. So the rules of engagement were different with the cardboard. One of the things that was fun about this workshop in particular is that Gio, because he was facilitating the workshop, had collected cardboard, I guess dumpster diving all over the city of Prague. And the first day when we showed up, you see the room we were working in, but there was a side room that was full of all of these different kinds of cardboard, any kind of packaging that he thought would be helpful, that he could pull in for us to work with. So when he was giving us advice on how to work sort of fast and furious to make these puppets, he was telling us not to be hesitant when we cut. He wasn't doing anywhere near as much marking or blade safety as I'm accustomed to when I'm teaching, but was also sort of giving us the rule that if you needed to fix something, use it by adding more rather than less. Don't be hesitant and take things away, but rather work with layers. Now, the flip side of that is it can get very, very heavy. So the other thing that he told us that became really important was distinguish between trim and features that can be made of lighter gauge cardboard or paper. You see on the steer, the auroch that eventually had long horns that my group was making, there's a kind of tangle of very light cardboard or paper on the top. The nose ring is made of something that's almost paper rather than cardboard. And the ears are made of very light cardboard that was still corrugated, but that we could intentionally roll and make it take on that shape. Where the structure is made of the kind of cardboard box, you can see the IKEA label, that was used for shipping and more resembles your Amazon boxes, your moving boxes that might be your most plentiful source of cardboard. And that distinction between structure and trim is part of what was meant to help us make the task manageable. The other thing I realized because of the material limitations is that it forced me to experiment more with what the cardboard could do. One thing I was thinking about when I was preparing for this is it's tempting to use the phrase, learning these methods that let you make things with cardboard and newspaper, simple staples and glue feels like making something out of nothing. But one of the things you quickly find out as a puppeteer is that cardboard is not nothing. Every material is specific. Every material can be explored in its own ways. So I found myself in this world of limitations where I couldn't get more colors of paper or paint, experimenting with doing things like cracking the layers of the cardboard apart or trying to peel the gloss layer off because I needed some white for the eyes. So it made me think of cardboard in a whole new way, not just the common gauges that I see all the time, the Amazon box, the moving box, but to really start to appreciate that the packaging has more subtlety to it than I'd previously thought. For instance, those IKEA boxes where the outside was very structural also had interior layers that were meant to prevent scratching, and those were much softer and were a positive addition to other parts of the puppets. The other thing that automatically happened with these, you see the IKEA on the end of the nose. Since we were choosing to let the material be itself and not add those cover layers, I think there was a little bit of subtle commentary to it. Look at the packaging we create. Also look at what it's possible to do with it. And I kind of enjoyed that aspect. A part of me that learned that skinned method first, where you make the skeleton from the cardboard and the skin from the additional layer of paper mache, was worried that I would be disappointed with the results of the workshop. But instead, it just becomes yet another different method. I can work fast and furious and let the material be itself, or I can aim for those more multi-layered, more smooth finishes on my puppet. And both will make something big and beautiful that I can take out and use to make a crowd of onlookers happy. What you're seeing here at the end is where we paraded through Old Town Prague, through the tourist district, with our puppets after they were done. And I like to think that we helped make these people's selfies and camera rolls a little bit different, even though they were in front of the same shops that everyone else visited. So this isn't something from nothing. This is all a story about exploring your materials, learning new methods so that you can make something fabulous to share. I think I'm reaching the end of my time and I'm happy with the way that I've told that story. So I'm going to stop my share and come back. I think I'm going to mute myself. I think at this point, you don't need me to turn off my video.
Yeah, we just need everybody else to come on screen. So Dimitri, if you're at your temple, and Brad, Brad may need someone to turn him on, perhaps.
Yes.
But we can hear you, Brad.
Oh, okay.
So,
Yeah, trust me, it's better.
okay, so I'm looking in, I'm not seeing questions in the Q&A, but let us start. I'll ask people to put in the Q&A any questions that you have. Dimitri very kindly put his email into the chat, inviting people to contact him if you need to know anything more about tools. But I want to ask both Brad and Dimitri, where do you get these tools? If you live in the US and you're not studying in Japan, and for Sky, for the things that you're doing, where do you dumpster dive?
Dimitri, do you want to go first?
Sure. If you need tools, there's actually it seems like a resurgence of little tiny shops of blacksmiths making specialized tools all over the world. And nowadays, you can actually order tools from all over the world. But if you want some tools from Taiwan specifically, and if you know me, let me know soon, and I'll see if I can pick some up for you.
I know it's hard to find Japanese tools in the States, but I think it's Hina, Hina Woods or Hina Tools. Hina Tools in Berkeley does carry very similar tools to some of the ones that I have. And I've also seen there's a company that does it both that's in Tokyo that'll ship from Tokyo. Of course, now, there's lots of problems with the tariffs and also shipping is very expensive. But if money isn't a huge issue, they're available. Even eBay, you can usually find some. What I do like about the Japanese tools, which we also found with the Korean tools, is that they're incredibly thin. I think this is true of what Dimitri showed us in Taiwan. And I do find that American ones tend to be thicker. So even when I buy a European tool or American, I'll grind it down to make it a much thinner bevel.
My dumpster diving is often right now about trying to divert recycling streams at the school. So trying to find out like, hey, library, if you have the dump bin next to the printer for the bad printouts, I want those. I've also had archivists before who were cleaning out their newspapers, who then knew that I was the person to send everything to instead of putting it in the recycling bin. So I found that really helpful. I also want to respond to one thing I did see in the chat. I'll look up those specific cutting tools you're using because that might teach me something, to be perfectly honest, because this has always been something I was doing in a classroom. We use box cutters that are as ordinary as possible, precisely so that students can go do it for themselves without needing anything specialized. So I'm afraid I don't have quite as magical a toolbox as our other two presenters today.
Okay. We do now have some questions in the chat. We have one from Kristen Haverty. Have you found and connected with your teachers and experiences abroad to learn puppet building? How have you found, how did you start out and how did you end up going to Taiwan or Japan? Or Sky told us it was via Dacia, and she's a descendant of Bread and Puppet. What is your lineages? And how, if a person's doing it now, what would they do to find these workshops or opportunities? Brad, Dimitri, Sky too.
In my case, it was really Marty Holman, and it wasn't a regular workshop. It was something that Makimoto was willing to do. And I studied with him for a couple summers. He actually passed away about 3.5 years ago. There are, in Japan, though, in the Tokushima and Awaji area, there are regular workshops. They only meet maybe once every other week, but they're taught by masters. One is with a museum, I know. And so there aren't that many carvers, and there's a lot of concern that the technique is going to be lost. So people are very open and very, it's not a secretive thing. They're very open and very willing to teach. But it's sort of a matter of being there anyway. As opposed to someone saying, okay, come for 2 weeks and you'll be able to carve a ningyo.
So maybe I'll mention, since we're being hosted this little presentation today from UNIMA. UNIMA is a really great way to connect with puppeteers anywhere in the world that you want to meet puppeteers. And like everybody else has said, most puppeteers are really open to sharing nowadays. Historically, that wasn't always the case. A lot of people wanted to keep trade secrets or what have you. But nowadays, a lot of puppeteers are very open to sharing. There's a lot of language tools out there for everybody if language is a hindrance. So I'd encourage everybody to go out there and explore the world. There's a lot of great things out there to find. For myself, I was invited to Taiwan specifically for doing an exhibit. I've done a couple of exhibits here and taught a couple of carving classes here. And they've got a really interesting program here called a gold card, which allows people to live and work in Taiwan as long as you want without like a tourist visa. And a friend of mine had gotten one actually for something completely different, not for puppets. And I thought, well, if he got one, maybe I can try. And so I got a gold card, and I'm able to come and go. And it allows me to work here for whoever I want. It's not like a work visa where it's tied to a specific employer. And so I can come and go. I can stay as long as I want. I can work. I can not work. I can do whatever I want here. And so it's quite an amazing opportunity. I think for folks in the EU, it's similar, where if you're in the EU, you can come and go, and the borders aren't such an issue. And so there's a lot of opportunities all over the world to go and meet with puppeteers and puppet makers who are usually quite open to sharing.
Can I throw in two more things?
Sure.
I'm just aware of time. If you can make it to the Prague Quadrennial, the next one's in 2027. There are almost always puppetry workshops. I know a friend of mine taught reed puppetry a few years ago, in addition to this cardboard one that I took. The Chicago International Puppet Theater Festival, if you join their newsletters and their mailing lists, a lot of their puppeteers teach online classes. So that can be nice if you don't necessarily have the means to travel but want to learn. And Rough House Puppet Company in Chicago also does workshops there, and sometimes they join that sort of club of doing education online. So those are some other ones that I can throw out there and recommend from personal experience.
Kathy, I'm not on the committee anymore, but could you speak to the scholarship, UNIMA-USA Scholarship Committee?
I mean, for people who are members of UNIMA, you can apply to a puppetry program anywhere in the world and have a $1,500 scholarship. Nowadays, that only may cover just the transportation rather than fees or whatever if you're going to Europe. But many people have used that to go to places in Asia. A lot of people have studied in Prague, carving marionettes. There's teaching that goes on every summer program. If you hook up with the UNIMA Training Commission, you'll be aware that they have online trainings sometimes. And then they've been doing lots of workshops in Africa, and some people have gone and joined all of the African countries, as either observers or participants as well. So getting involved with UNIMA will make you aware of where some of these things are. UNIMA Germany, I know, has workshops every summer, and they're funded by the government. It's for the German people coming together, but you can join. And I think that we had a training, puppetry training thing that included a lot of Americans and Canadians. A few months ago that Eric Bass put together, and he's planning on doing another one that may have something to do with Africa or Europe or things like that. So just be aware that if you join UNIMA, you'll have some access to that. And if you need funding, do apply to the UNIMA-USA. We only give one a year, but some years there are not lots of people who are applying and planning to go. So think about it. Okay, let's move to another of our questions. This is for Sky. Did you plan for ways for your cardboard creations to be carried as you were building them, or did you improvise that afterwards?
The ones for Prague had handles on the insides. So if you think about the way that if you've ever bought a garment box when you're moving, and there's sort of a handle that's slotted into it between the layers of cardboard. We were sort of thinking about that to make handles on the insides of them so they could be moved. I confess, because we were all trying to get used to doing it this new way, ours was heavier than I wished it was by the time I made it down a couple city blocks with it. But that's how we were holding them up. So you could either think about it as taking a cardboard tube and putting caps on the ends and sliding it between layers of cardboard, or if you had a tube and you'd already finished your head and you needed to get it in there, you could also cut slots in the end of the tube so that you could splay it out and you could staple or tape that and probably get enough security to create a handhold for yourself. I hope that my hand talking and my word talking worked together to answer that question.
Okay, here's a question for everyone, for all the presenters, from Macy Thomas. If storage is an issue with saving finished puppets, what do you advise for knowing what can be reused or donated, or knowing what and where to discard? This, I think, is especially for those large cardboard or paper mache kinds of things, large puppets. But any thoughts of anyone? Storage.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Sky.
Right now, we're experimenting with hanging them from the ceiling in the scene shop or seeing if we can put them way up in the fly space, but that still may not be something everyone has. One way I would, if it was up to me and I had to decide what to keep and what to let go, I try to keep my students' puppets for at least a little while or it hurts their feelings. But I also try to think about which ones connect to local concerns or local events. So what happens in your community that you might use them for? Like right now, we're trying to plan an event with a local library for kids because we have a dragon already. And when dragons love tacos is apparently the thing with small kids right now. So look for the things your community can use if you need a way to prioritize.
I have a giant dragon that ended up in the grad area staring at them. I'm not sure they're that thrilled about it. But I was doing a lot of cardboard a while back, and it got to the point where I had about 20 of them and had no space in my workspace. So I declared that they were all models for my drawing class and put them in the classroom.
So yeah, storage is a huge problem for anybody who makes anything, and also for anybody involved with an institution who collects things. We've got thousands and thousands and thousands of puppets at Northwest Puppet Center, and we're actually looking at doing another capital campaign because we're running out of space with the 2 buildings that we already have. So
this is from Charles Pillsbury. Carving question. Are there any specific techniques or tools you might suggest for a carver developing mobility issues in their hands, arthritis or something like that? Any suggestions? Or you haven't gotten arthritis yet?
I've been worried about it, but I haven't had troubles yet, and I try to keep in shape in that regard. A friend of mine who actually had tinnitus as a musician recommended a special little exercise ball that's like a gyroscope inside of a little ball, and that helps with wrist and hand strength. And I think wrist and hand strength is really important for carving. Also, just working on stretching. And if you're a builder and also a puppeteer, you also want to work on the stretching along with the carving, because otherwise your hands get a little bit tense, and you want to keep stretching out your fingers. There's a lot of finger exercises, especially that hand puppeteers do. So yeah, I recommend stretching your hands and then also exercising your wrists. And then as far as things to do, try not to cut towards yourself is the number one thing I always tell people.
Thank you.
Not knowing the
Yeah.
specifics, I would also think different materials, working with balsa or even foam instead of harder woods might
Mhm.
be an advantage.
Okay, this is a question for Sky. Is there any specific cardboard box manufacturers or companies that ship boxes that have specific qualities that you appreciate in large puppet making? Brad might be able to. You work in cardboard
I'm
too.
so often a scavenger that I have to just admit that I don't have a perfect answer to that. Um, I think I've gotten very accustomed to working with moving boxes because that's one that inevitably you'll hear someone say they moved house and then they have the pile and they need to get rid of it. And they're always happy to give them to me. So I think by default, that's become a common material for me. But other than strength, which much cardboard has, there's not anything specific about that other than availability. So maybe that's a disappointing answer, but it's true.
I used to work as a designer for a theater that was right next to an appliance store, and we would recycle their refrigerator boxes. Bicycle boxes are large too. These days, I usually buy. I just buy it in sheets. You can get some from Staples that are quite reasonable, although they tend to fold the bigger pieces. And we're in an area, I'm in Toledo, Ohio, and there's lots of places that are simply packaging manufacturing. And you can buy individual sheets. And because a lot of what I'm doing need to be big pieces that don't fold, that don't have scores or anything, it's worth it to me to buy a big sheet and work with something fresh. Definitely not, it's definitely not a recycling aesthetic at all. But for me, it's less, it just seems to work better.
Okay, well, we are now approaching the end of our time. I want to thank all of you. I seem to have lost Dimitri. Uh, there, he's still there. The sky has changed.
But he has a tree on his head.
Where in the world is Dimitri Carter? I want to thank you.
I'm just starting to walk away from the gate where I was perched.
Okay. So I want to thank you. I want to, tell people this is UNIMA-USA. These people are accessible. Send them an email. If you have a question, also let us know what you're doing in your projects. Everyone out there who's on this has probably done some dumpster diving or know which big box store has what they think are the best. Write up the articles for Puppetry International. It is about sharing, which is all that UNIMA is. So thank you so much to you guys for sharing your knowledge. I remember doing a workshop that we did for UNIMA-USA in Korea, making Korean puppets, and it was hearing Dimitri and Brad as they were carving these puppets, talking about all these specific things and the best workshops and the timing. So these people all have a wealth of knowledge and experience, and that's what this organization is about, how to find out the information and then bring it down to your local community or the production that you are building to make art and share it with your community. So thank you so much to everyone who listened. Thank you so much to everyone who presented. And for future Zooms, just let me know the topics, the ideas, and other things like that. There's so much to know about the world of puppetry, and we have so many bright, artistic, intelligent people who have those secrets. Thank you so much to
Thank you.
the
Thank you,
Center
Kathy.
for
Thank you,
Puppetry
Sarah.
Arts
Thank you,
and
everyone.
Sarah Bernenko,
Thanks,
who
everyone.
makes it all happen. Thank you, Sarah, and the Center for hosting these Zooms. Thank you, everyone, and goodbye.
Bye.